Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to the initiative of Economy this week, wherein we'll be taking up all the important economy related articles which have appeared in various business related newspapers from 11th to 17th June 2022 and having an analysis of these particular articles. Let me begin the discussion. The first article is regarding rice exports. In the last couple of months, if you have been reading the newspaper, you must have come across various articles which are discussing, one, the situation of inflation in India, second, how these particular exports which might basically fuel inflation in the domestic market. Some of you might be thinking, sir, how can exports cause inflation in India? Very simple. If the exports keep on rising up from India and the domestic supply is not sufficient, then there is a tendency of having a very high inflationary trend in the domestic market. And keeping in mind this particular situation, the government in recent times has been imposing curbs with respect to promotion of exports of sugar from India. Basically, it has imposed certain restrictions there. It has also imposed restriction with respect to export of wheat from India. And very recently regarding steel also, government has imposed restriction with respect to exporting. Now, in this particular regard, what are the important points? First and foremost, the headline of the article. Have a look at this. The government has clarified that there is no plan of the government currently to impose any kind of a restriction with respect to exports. In the recent times, the food inflation rate has been on a higher side. The overall inflation rate, for example, WPI has been more than 15%. CPI has been in the range of 7%. In regards to that, now there was a basic discussion in the market, which was basically looking at the fact that after imposing a ban on export of wheat and imposing restrictions with respect to sugar exports, government might simply target rice exports. And in regards to that, government has clarified, no, we are not going to impose any kind of restriction with respect to rice exports. But here are certain very important points. One, couple of months down from now on, government might simply change the stance. It can happen, or there's a possibility of that. Why? Understand this. Most of the rice that is cultivated in India is cultivated during Kharif. And presently, the IMD has estimated that we will get a normal monsoon, normal rainfall. And the stocks that we have and the production that we have could be sufficient to meet the demand in the coming days. But if there is any change in the monsoon, and all of you know, I'm pretty sure by now you know that most of the cultivation that happens in India is directly dependent upon monsoon. So if there is any change in the situation of monsoon or the rainfall that we are going to receive during monsoon, trust me, the government might look at this particular situation of imposing curbs on rice exports. That's one point. Second point, why is India so important? Why most of the countries are looking at India and are concerned if government will change the stance? Simple. One, India is a major producer of this particular crop. Major producer, one of the largest producers in the global market. The biggest exporter of rice to the global market in the current year is India. It exports rice to more than 150 countries. And one more advantage that government of India has provided to the other countries which are importing rice is that government of India, because there is so much of supply or very high amount of supply in the domestic market, has been able to sell this particular rice, or India has been able to sell the rice at discounted prices, lower prices in the international market. Whereas other countries, they have actually increased their prices looking at the higher demand in the international market. They have actually increased the prices, which is affecting the importing countries. So if government of India imposes curbs, imposes restriction with respect to rice exports, definitely yes, there is a very high expectation that with that the international food prices would spike to a very high level, and that would again lead to higher inflation in the global market, and more importantly, availability of food grains in many other countries would come down, and that will also have an impact on poverty situation. So these are some of the very important points regarding the rice exports which have been discussed in this particular article. Now, based on this, I have given an MCQ. Consider the following statements. India is the largest exporter of rice to the global market in the current year. Statement 1 is correct, by the way. India is the largest consumer of rice. Right? What do you think? Even the second statement is correct. As per the latest estimates or the data which has been provided by the government, both of the statements are true. Right option for this particular question will be option C. Next, export curbs and trade deficit. Now, what is this article discussing? In this particular article, please understand this. First and foremost, they are discussing that India is one of the major exporters to the international market in the current situation, especially the crops, agriculture crops. But apart from this, the other situation is also that India is also a major importer of many of these particular commodities. For example, energy related commodities. Right? For example, natural gas, crude oil, etc. So on one side, Government of India is imposing curbs on promotion of exports from India, which might basically reduce the value of exports done from India to rest of the world. But on the other hand, the international prices of many of these particular commodities is actually inching upwards. It is increasing, and that might have an impact on the cost of imports that we are doing. And basics, apply the basics now. If your exports are higher, which is normally the situation in case of the other countries such as China, but in case of India, the exports compared to the value of imports is lower. In this particular situation, because of the government policy to curb inflation in the domestic market, now the other outcome may be that the trade deficit might start ballooning. Couple of years ago, because of the pandemic, one of the positive outcomes of the pandemic was that the trade deficit has actually come down. We enjoyed a surplus in the current account, which basically means there was a net inflow of dollars under the current account. And generally in the context of India, we have been having a current account deficit. Now, having said so, after the pandemic or most of the issue related to pandemic was addressed, the impact of the pandemic receded, we have reverted back to current account deficit. We have been having trade deficit. Now, because of this particular policy of the government, the imports will remain high, or the value of imports which are already higher because of international prices of various commodities will further increase. But on the other hand, export values would start coming down. And this particular trade deficit, which is a problem for India, the trade deficit will further balloon. In this particular article, what is the other information that you need to look at? One, have a look at this particular graph. Many of you will keep on saying, sir, if UPSC will ask a trend-based question, from where do I get all of these particular trends? One example is here itself. It doesn't represent the overall exports as well as imports from India, because please understand, whenever you talk about imports and exports, you are talking about goods as well as services. But in this particular graph, they are basically mentioned only the merchandise imports as well as merchandise exports. Goods imported, goods exported. The value of imports as well as exports of the goods have not remained constant, neither have they continuously increased nor continuously decreased. You can simply find a zigzag pattern of the imports as well as exports done by India to the rest of the world or from rest of the world. And there itself you can simply find the fact that the imports of the goods which are done into India is higher compared to the goods exported from India, which basically means what? There is a trade deficit. What has happened to the trade deficit? The trade deficit has been fluctuating. The trade deficit has neither consistently increased nor consistently decreased. It has been fluctuating. That is a trend-based question here. What are the commodities which are imported into India? What are the commodities which are exported from India? The list is also provided in this particular article. Please have a look at it. Sir, where can I use it? Some of you will simply raise this question. Very good, you have given the data, but where can I use it? For example, if there is a mains-based question on the imports and exports, for example, the question can be asked like this. India has achieved a milestone of crossing more than $400 billion worth of exports. Elaborate right, or discuss. You can simply quote some of these particular facts there itself. Done? So this is the article, discussing the issue of trade deficit which might balloon because of the government policies. Now another type of question which can be asked is, the UPSC will simply throw a question at you like this. The government, in order to control inflation, has taken various initiatives. One of those has been to impose restriction in terms of promotion of exports or holding back the exports. But this particular policy has certain unintended consequences. Elaborate. Here is a consequence of it. Done? So please have a look at these particular articles which might be helpful for you, either in the prelims based questions as well as even in writing a mains based question. Now based on this, I have given one question here. Analytical question: which of the following steps may be taken by the government to reduce the trade deficit? 1. It can impose quotas. What is this idea of a quota? Please understand this. Whenever we discuss the concept of WTO, World Trade Organization, we discussed the idea of trade barriers. The concept of trade barriers. Now there are two types of trade barriers. One is a tariff barrier and the other one is a non-tariff barrier. Quota is an example of a non-tariff barrier. In fact, if you look at the effectiveness of these particular barriers, the non-tariff barriers, NTBs, are much more effective compared to the tariff barriers. So can quotas be used to impose restriction on exports? Of course, yes. On imports? Of course, yes. And when you impose these quantitative restrictions, which has been done by the way by the government in the context of sugar, can they limit the amount of exports? Yes. And when they limit the amount of exports, the earnings that the government would have earned or an economy would have earned because of exports will come down, and that might have an impact on a trade deficit. Now the question is, which of the following can reduce the trade deficit? Which of the following will be helpful in reduction in the trade deficit? Please understand, quotas, if the government will impose quotas, exports will come down. And when the exports will come down, what will happen? Earnings will come down. And when the earnings will come down, generally what happens is the trade deficit is expected to be affected negatively. So quotas cannot be used, or rather than this, I have already given the option here, the key answer I have given here. Rather than reducing the trade deficit, let's make it increase the trade deficit. Okay, rather than reduction in the trade deficit, which of the following will contribute or may contribute to increase the trade deficit? Quotas, will they contribute to trade deficit? Of course, yes, because exports will become restricted, and when exports will become restricted, what will happen? The earnings will become lower, and when the earnings become lower, right, the imports will continue to flow, best example India, and the trade deficit will widen. So increase the trade deficit, yes, quotas will contribute there. Export bans, extreme case situation, yes. If you simply impose an export ban, what will happen? Your exports will not go to the rest of the world. Imports are coming, so trade deficit will widen. Higher export duties. So basically you are exporting, government will impose a higher tariff on this, customs on this. Some of you will be thinking, sir, can we impose customs on the exports? Yes. Best example on steel, government of India has imposed customs in order to prohibit more and more exports from India. So when export duties are imposed, higher duties are imposed, exports from India will come down, right, and the imports will keep on flowing. That will add to trade deficit. Third one, yes, elimination of import duties. If you simply eliminate the import duties, what will happen? The imports will continue to flow into India. And the outflow of dollars will increase, the trade deficit will widen. So fourth one, correct. So right option for this particular question will be option C, 1, 2, 3 and 4. Elimination of import duties, yes, right. Basically all of these will lead to higher trade deficit. Next question, use and file system or use and file methodology. Now what is this use and file methodology? First and foremost, this article is related to Insurance Regulatory Development Authority of India, IRDAI, Insurance Regulatory Development Authority of India. Now whenever you are talking about IRDAI, please understand this. First and foremost, because there was a question asked suddenly this year regarding credit rating agencies, next year it could be IRDAI. IRDAI is an agency which has been set up by the government with the passage of an act. So it is a statutory body. Remember this. It is a statutory body. First point. So Government of India set up IRDAI. This authority will basically regulate the insurance as well as the reinsurance sector in India, and it will try to protect the interest of the customers. They will have to protect it. Next, very important point. Please understand this. Whenever you talk about a regulatory body like this, the concept here is the institutions, or let's say the companies which are working in this particular sector, before they are supposed to launch a product or launch a new, let's say, a service like this, first and foremost, they will have to take the approval from the regulatory body. But in the context of the insurance sector, very recently what IRDA has done is, it has introduced a system of use and file. What is this use and file? IRDA simply says that when you want to launch a new product, now you don't have to come to me, take permission for that. You can simply launch a product or a service, then come to me, take approval from my side. I'll repeat it. Use and file. I have written this particular headline like this. Next year, a straightforward, very simple question, by the way, by UPSC in the prelims could be like this. The term use and file, recently seen in news, is associated with what? Or is referring to dash. So the term use and file has been used by IRDAI. It simply says you are an insurance company. You want to launch a new product, launch it. You don't have to take any permission from my side. But will it cover all the types of insurance products? Absolutely no. Only some of them will not be covered under this. Rest of these insurance products will be coming under the concept of use and file. Now some of you might be thinking, sir, what is the advantage? Why is the regulator telling the companies launch it, then come to me and tell me the information? Don't you think that's bad? Not necessarily. The argument that has been put forward by the regulator is that whenever you are talking about insurance sector, it is mature enough now. Initially, when there is a development or there is a growth phase in the sectors, we want to regulate the sectors. But once the sector is mature enough, we should give a free hand to the participants in the sectors. And if I basically impose restrictions here, if I keep on interfering in the functioning of these particular companies, it might hinder the growth of these particular companies. That's the first thing. Or it will make it very difficult for them to conduct business in India. First reason. Second very important reason is, market is very dynamic. Is it okay? Market is very, very dynamic. And when the market is dynamic, the requirement of the customers keep on changing every now and then. It makes more sense if I give a free hand to the companies to introduce new products based on the market situation. Otherwise, what might happen is, today I have a demand for this kind of a product, but the company first has to go to the regulator, seek all the approvals, then introduce the product. By that time, many more months could have passed or time would have been passed. The situation in the market will not remain the same, or the taste and preference of the consumers may not remain the same. That is the precise reason, in order to help the companies to design and introduce new schemes, or let's say new products as per the requirement of the market, the regulator basically says we will introduce the concept of use and file system. And the next very important advantage is that as a customer, I will be getting more and more products now in the market. I can choose from many more services or products which are being offered by newer companies. So these are some of the very important reasons which have been cited by the regulator to introduce the concept of use and file system in the insurance companies or in the insurance sector. Now I've given an MCQ here. Consider the following statements. IRDAI has been set up with the passage of executive order by the government in 2017. No, this particular statement is wrong. IRDAI has been set up in 1990s with the passage of Insurance Act. So this particular statement is wrong, by the way. Second, it regulates insurance and reinsurance industry or a sector. Statement 2 is correct. By the way, I have given the key answer here. Option B is the right option. Option B is the right option for this particular question. Let me go to the next article regarding FDI inflows. What is this idea of FDI inflows being discussed here? First and foremost, all of you will agree, we need more investments in Indian economy. Agreed. Not debatable. This is a fact. We need more and more investments in the domestic market. And one of the ways of investing in the domestic market is through foreign direct investment. And in case of India, please understand, because of various policies of the government or the growth that Indian economy was showcasing earlier, we have been able to attract a lot of foreign investments in the Indian market, especially in the form of, let's say, concept of M&A, merger and acquisitions. M&A stands for mergers and acquisition. Just in a nutshell, merger simply means two companies are getting merged, right? Either basically through an agreement or the owner is willing to sell, etc. Whereas in the context of acquisition, which has been there in the newspaper, let me quote a current affairs article so that you understand it quickly. Mr. Elon Musk wants to acquire Twitter, or has basically proposed, right, a deal, and he is on the way to acquire Twitter. So the idea is very simple. In case of acquisition, the second company which is going to be acquired, right, it may not be willing, but it will anyways be purchased by somebody else. So in case of mergers and acquisitions, this has been one of the major contributors of huge amount of FDI inflows into India. The data has been provided here. As per various reports, in the year 21 and 22, in the year 21 as well as 2022, the total amount of FDI, okay, the total amount of FDI received is around $84 billion. This is as per Government of India's data. And for the previous year, that is basically for 2020, have a look at this. The amount of the FDI which has flown into India in the form of mergers and acquisition actually increased compared to the previous year, that is 2019, to around $27 billion. It has increased to around $27 billion because many foreign companies have brought in dollars into India to purchase the companies in India. But after 1 year, that is basically in the next year, 2021, the amount of investment that has come into India through the mergers and acquisition has actually gone down. It has actually gone down to $8 billion. So this is one reason why FDI inflows into India have actually come down. Second very important point, if you see the concept of infrastructure or let's say investment, generally there are two types of investments. One is called as a greenfield investment and the second one is called as brownfield investments. Now basically idea is very simple here. Greenfield investments simply means the investment in let's say an infrastructure project or a particular project is done and the project is constructed from the scratch. Very simple, the project is constructed from the scratch. Whereas when you talk about the brownfield investment, basically these are those particular projects where infrastructure is already there and somebody is coming and investing in this particular infrastructure. For example, airport is already there, somebody will come, pay money to the government and will start operating the airport. This is an example of a brownfield infrastructure. What about a greenfield infrastructure? Airport is not there. Government will tell the private company to develop this particular airport. So generally whenever you talk about investments, this concept of greenfield and brownfield is very, very important. Why? Have a look at this particular data. India is one of the largest growing economies or fastest growing economies. For example, in 2015 and 16 and 17, the growth rate in case of Indian economy was basically more than 8%. Right, for 8% for 15 and 16 and 8.3% for 16 and 17. And thereafter, the growth rate in case of Indian economy has come down and very recently you must know this. Right, in one of the year, that is previous year, we have registered a negative growth rate. Right, now we are actually in the path of recovering completely. Now the issue here, right, sir, why this growth is important? Imagine you are an investor. Where do you want to invest? Would you want to invest in a particular country where the growth rate is high? Prospects of growth are very, very high. In fact, it is registering very good growth rate in a particular year. Or you want to invest in a particular country where the growth is very low, investments are very low, lot of issues are there in the economy, etc. Let me give you one example so that you understand. Would you want to invest in a country which is registering a growth rate of 6%, 8%? Or a country such as Sri Lanka where there are so many issues in the economy? Answer will be straightforward. Sir, I want to invest in a country where growth prospects are very, very high. Exactly apply the same logic here. The Indian economy kept on registering very good growth rates until let's say 16 and 17 and thereafter took a plunge, took a hit, the slowdown started having an impact and the same can be seen even in the context of the greenfield investments. There is a huge inflow of greenfield investments in case of Indian economy when India was registering very high or very good growth rates. And when the Indian economy started registering a slowdown, then fell into recession in the last 2 years, this particular investment in the form of greenfield investments under FDI, they also have taken a hit. And the third very important reason cited in this particular article is the investors are also feeling certain concerns or experiencing certain concerns with respect to land acquisition, with respect to, let's say, getting certain clearances from the government, dealing with the state government officials, etc. These are some of the reasons which have been cited by this article as a reason for slowdown in the foreign direct investment in the domestic market. Done? So this is the information provided in this particular article regarding foreign direct investment inflowing into India actually slowing down. Apart from this, you can also have a look at the first line itself. This could be a question asked in the UPSC prelims. That is, generally in case of UPSC prelims, there's a tendency, I keep on saying there's a tendency, no guarantee, because then you will basically show me the previous year question paper and say, sir, this year the question was not asked on the reports. But anyways, have a look at this. There is one report which has been quoted here, UNCTAD's, UNCTAD, UNCTAD's, the World Investment Report, right? So, straightforward question which could be asked by UPSC in the prelims is, which of the following authority publishes World Investment Report? Or else, the flip side to that would be, the World Investment Report is published by which of the following authorities? By the way, it is UNCTAD. Done? So, these are certain very important points from this particular article. Let me go to the next article. First display fab has been announced in case of India. Basically, display fab, etc., all of them are related to semiconductors. First and foremost, these are all connected to concept of semiconductors. And India is hugely dependent upon imports of these particular semiconductors. And not to address this particular issue of very high dependence on the imports, Government of India in the last 1 year has been taking a lot of initiatives or measures to promote production of semiconductors in the domestic market. For example, government has launched a design-linked incentive scheme. Apart from this, government also has launched ISM, Indian Semiconductor Mission. Now, in continuation to that, in addition to that, there is one more point here. The Government of India, or basically the state government of the Telangana, has announced that the LST company, which is a subsidiary of Rajesh Exports, will be setting up the first India's, or let's say the first display fab manufacturing unit in the domestic market. And the investment, huge amount of investment will be done by this particular, let's say, company in manufacturing of this. Now, where are the semiconductors used? In all the electronic equipments, let's say all the equipments that we are using, or most of the equipments that we are using, there will be a usage of semiconductors. And under this particular article, one point has been given. I don't expect UPSC to ask this particular question, but this area, yes, very, very important. The mission that has been mentioned, or the program of Government of India has been mentioned here, India Semiconductor Mission, ISM. India Semiconductor Mission. Question can be asked from there. Now, what is this India Semiconductor Mission? Have a look at these particular points. India Semiconductor Mission is an independent business division which has been set up by the government. This particular authority, or let's say this particular division, has been made autonomous and it has been given huge amount of duties to actually perform. It is said that any policy regarding the semiconductor, let's say production, manufacturing, sales, usage, etc., will be driven by this particular ISM itself, or the division itself. Now, what are the objectives of ISM? It is to drive India's strategies for developing semiconductors and display manufacturing ecosystem, and to act as a nodal agency for this particular purpose, as mentioned below, for these particular reasons. For example, imagine I want to set up a semiconductor manufacturing facility. I can simply interact with this particular division, and it will ensure that whatever assistance can be provided by the government, they will try to mediate and try to ensure that. For example, have a look at this. ISM is authorized to negotiate with the applicants, because understand the logic here. There are these kind of schemes which have been launched by the government: semiconductor fab scheme, display fab scheme, etc. And if there is any applicant who wants to set up a manufacturing unit under this, it is ISM which has been given the authority by the government to negotiate to basically assist these particular investors to set up these particular manufacturing units. It can also propose the structure and the quantum of fiscal support for these particular selected applicant or applicants. So these are certain very important points regarding ISM. And so please be very careful with respect to this article. Concept of semiconductors has been there in the discussion. I don't expect UPSC to go to the extent of asking which company will be setting up this for the first time in India. But definitely yes, the other part of the article, that one statement, India Semiconductor Mission, is very, very important for UPSC. Next article, Bharat Gaurav Express. The first train which will be operated by the private sector companies or private operator has started operations. The government in the last couple of years has been basically putting forward this particular policy or idea where they want the private sector to operate the trains. Not own the whole railway, but operate certain routes, especially those particular routes which are associated with culture of India. And in regards to this, Government of India announced a policy, Bharat Gaurav policy, right, in November 2021. And under this particular policy, any private operator or anybody can simply apply and take these particular certain routes, or they use the term circuits, and start operating the railways, or let's say providing the services as a package, tourist package in these particular the circuit as such. What is the speciality about this? When I say circuits are used, package is provided, please understand, in this example, a particular train will basically connect Coimbatore with Shirdi. And it's not just that they will basically take the passengers from this point to this point. No, absolutely no. They will provide all the services starting from food to accommodation if it is required. Everything will be provided by the private sector company itself or private sector operator. That is the specialty about these particular circuits or tourist packages which are announced by these private sector companies. Now under this particular policy, Bharat Gaurav policy, government simply says a private sector operator or anybody can apply, operate or provide the services or the packages in these particular circuits, and in return they will have to pay a certain amount of money. For example, as per this particular article, the idea that has been provided here, because of this particular private sector operator, the Southern Railways would be earning an annual income of more than 3.3 crore rupees, more than 3.3 crore. And the best part of this is, the Southern Railways is not making any investment here, absolutely no investment. They are ensuring that the customers will get these particular services. Second, the private operator will be able to earn money, and the most important one, the government, that is basically the ministry or the railways, will be able to generate revenues. So keeping in mind all of this, Government of India has announced the concept of Bharat Gaurav policy. Under this, the first train has started operating. So this will become very, very important. Please have a look at this. And this is just the first one. In the coming days, Government of India has stated that we will provide more and more such facilities in this particular segment, that is railways. Having said so, there has been certain opposition here. Argument is that if you privatize the railways, if you start allowing the private sector companies to or private sector operators to operate these particular railways, what will happen to employment? What might happen to, let's say, the government employees who are working in the railways, etc. So these are certain very important points regarding this particular policy. I have given a question here. Consider the following statements. The lease or the tenure under the Bharat Gaurav policy is a minimum 1 year. Absolutely no, remember this. The lease or tenure under the Bharat Gaurav policy is a minimum of 2 years. That is, imagine a situation, you want to operate a particular circuit. Then you will have to enter into agreement wherein you will provide the services for minimum 2 years. Right? That is the condition here. Second, the Bharat Gaurav trains will be Bharat Gaurav train will be the first theme-based tourist train. Absolutely wrong. This is not the first theme-based tourist train. In fact, IRCTC is already running theme-based tourist trains as such. So both the statements are wrong. Right option is option D. The key answer is already provided here. Next, currency monitoring list. Related to USA, but India is included or India is involved here. Generally, what the USA Treasury does is, based on 3 parameters or 3, let's say the conditions as such, they will prepare a list of those countries and call this particular list as a currency monitoring list. And as per the latest list which has been published by the Treasury, 12 countries have been listed in this particular the monitoring list as such, and India is one of them. Apart from India, there are 11 more countries. Now, what are the important points here? First and foremost, what are the important parameters based on which USA prepares this particular list? Three very important parameters are: one, whether this particular country has a trade surplus with USA or does it have a trade deficit. If US has a trade surplus, nothing, no, don't worry. If US has a trade deficit, in simple terms, India and USA, if we talk about both these particular trading partners, India has a trade surplus, USA has a trade deficit. So if USA has a trade deficit of more than $20 billion with this particular country, then one, right, this is the first parameter. Second very important parameter is whether this particular country, right, that they are evaluating, whether this particular country, the central bank of this country, has it been intervening in the forex market? That is, has the central banker intervened in the forex market in terms of buying and selling the currencies, especially let's say buying the currencies? Has RBI done it, especially in the last 1 year? Yes. RBI, in order to basically let's say control the depreciation, or let's say manage the depreciation of the Indian rupee, has been intervening in the forex market. So if the intervention is also very high, that is also a parameter that the USA considers, right? So based on these kind of parameters, if a particular country meets two conditions out of these particular three conditions, the USA will basically call this particular country, identify this particular country, put it in the currency monitoring list. And what about India? India meets these particular two parameters, and that is a precise reason India has been listed in this particular monitoring list. What is the repercussion? What will happen if it is kept under a monitoring list? Very simple. If a country is kept under the monitoring list and has been labeled as a manipulator, then USA will take certain action in terms of trading against these particular countries. For example, if the foreign country, that is let's say India, if it has been identified as a manipulator, the Indian companies who want to invest in USA, there will be certain restrictions on that. And in addition to that, the image of India will be spoiled in the global market or tarnished in the global market. And moreover, if the rupee depreciates further in the domestic market, Indian RBI or the central banker of India will have very, very less leg room to actually intervene in the market, because already it is kept under the monitoring list like this. So these are certain very, very important points regarding currency monitoring list. Next article, Fitch credit rating. Right, this has been published in Hindu on 11th of June. Very simple. Very recently, Fitch has announced that it will upgrade India's outlook to stable from negative. Right? Understand, first and foremost, Fitch is one of the three global rating agencies, credit rating agencies by the way. The three very important credit rating agencies are: one, Fitch, then there is a Standard and Poor, right? So very, very important credit rating agencies. Why these are very important? These basically handle more than 90% of the global credit rating agency or market as such. Now in this particular context, very recently in the UPSC prelims, the question has been asked on this. But anyways, two very important points here. One, the Fitch credit rating agency has upgraded India's outlook. First point. Second point, do not be confused with the term outlook with rating. Rating is different, outlook is different. Outlook basically indicates what could be the position, or let's say what could be the movement of rating of a particular country in the coming days. Right? Please understand this. Outlook could be stable, negative, positive. Ratings are different. Ratings are basically a combination of alphabets as well as numbers. For example, many of the rating agencies have a combination of alphabets and numbers. Some of the agencies will provide BAA3, BAA2 like this, and some agencies will simply provide AAA, AA rating. So rating is either a combination of alphabets or simply straightforward alphabets, and that represents the credit worthiness of a particular borrower, to what extent he is going to pay back, or probability of repayment done by a borrower. Whereas the outlook doesn't represent a credit rating, it simply represents what could be the movement of credit rating in the coming days. So Fitch basically states that because of the let's say because of the improvement of Indian economy, because of certain improvement in certain macroeconomic parameters. The rating has not been changed, but the outlook has been changed from negative to stable because of the rapid recovery. Right? And apart from this, second very important point here is the growth forecast for the Indian economy has been downgraded. They have reduced the growth forecast for the current financial year. Earlier it had estimated 7.8%. Now because of higher inflationary trends in the domestic market, they have reduced this particular forecast to around 6.9%. So these are some of the very important points regarding this particular article. So these are the various important articles as well as the questions related to these particular articles for the duration 11th June to 17th June 2022. If you like this particular initiative, hit the like button, provide your valuable comments in the section below, and if you have not yet subscribed to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS, kindly do. Thank you. Have a great day.